Vannevar Bush was born on March 11, 1890 in Everett, Massachusetts, the third child of the Congregational minister Richard Perry Bush and his wife Emma Payne Bush. The surname, pronounced Vannevar, honored a maternal uncle. It became a conversational icebreaker in every meeting he ever chaired. During childhood, he built crystal radios from scrap galena. He dug behind the parsonage and devised a rope-and-pulley ferry so neighborhood kids could traverse a marshy inlet without wetting their shoes. At Chelsea High School, he devoured mathematics texts faster than teachers could grade his exercises, graduating in 1909 and winning a partial scholarship to Tufts College. To cover tuition, he spent summers as chief fathometer on a Massachusetts land survey crew, calculating harbor depths from rowboats, so leaky the theodolite legs sometimes stood in 4 inches of water. The fieldwork honed a practical impatience with theoretical elegance unmoored from instrumentation. Throughout his career, he would demand of colleagues, "What knob do I turn to see that?" Bush completed Tufts' rigorous combined program, earning both a BS and an MS in electrical engineering in 1913 by designing a profile tracer that could compute the area under an irregular curve mechanically. He filed his first patent on the device at age 23, financed with a $300 loan from an uncle secured by the family cow. After brief stints at General Electric, Schenectady Works, and the American Radio and Research Corporation of Medford, he entered a joint Harvard-MIT doctoral program. World War I loomed. Bush's dissertation tackled remote impedance measurement for submarine detection, a problem so urgent the Navy granted him classified access to Portsmouth Naval Yard. He earned his doctorate in 1916 and was immediately hired as an MIT instructor. Within 2 years, he and fellow engineer Alfred Loomis were prototyping a magnetic degaussing system that protected Allied ships from German mines, an early taste of bench science translating directly to battlefield survival. By 1922, MIT appointed him associate professor and co-director of the newly formed Electrical Engineering Research Laboratory. There he began the decade-long quest to automate differential equations that stymied physicists and artillery designers alike. Using bicycle chains, lead screws, and rotating discs coated in carborundum, he constructed the first analog calculating machine large enough to fill a classroom. The Differential Analyzer, unveiled in 1931, could integrate sixth-order equations at speeds unreachable by human calculators armed with slide rules. It attracted visiting researchers from ballistics offices, General Electric research labs, and even Bell Telephone's Claude Shannon, who in 1937 borrowed Bush's mechanical relays to show that Boole's algebra could be embodied in switching circuits, a discovery that lit the conceptual fuse of digital computing. Bush's own preference for continuous variables made him skeptical of binary abstraction, yet he encouraged Shannon's work, remarking, "Any engineer who ignores a promising idea because it offends his instincts is a damned fool." In 1932, MIT elevated Bush to vice president and dean of engineering. 6 years later, he accepted the presidency of the Carnegie Institution of Washington, one of the few American foundations funding pure science during the Depression. The move embedded him in a transcontinental network of industrialists, university presidents, and military officers who met quarterly at Yale Club dinners to ponder whether Hitler's rearmament could be matched by U.S. laboratories reliant on philanthropy and philistines. These contacts proved decisive in June 1940, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt called Bush to the Oval Office. France had fallen, radar intelligence looked dire, and Roosevelt wanted one man to orchestrate civilian science for national defense. Bush returned the next morning with a one-page memorandum proposing the National Defense Research Committee. FDR signed it on the spot, penciling OK, FDR in the margin. As chairman of the NDRC, and after 1941, director of its successor Office of Scientific Research and Development, Bush controlled a budget that grew from a modest $6 million to $500 million annually, equivalent to over $8 billion today. He wielded it with ruthless triage, projects promising a battlefield payoff within 18 months received blank checks. Anything slower was shelved. At MIT's radiation laboratory, he massed physicists into an unprecedented radar consortium that produced the cavity magnetron and microwave early warning systems crucial to British air defense and U-boat suppression. He placed Alfred Loomis in charge of the proximity fuse program at Johns Hopkins, financed Merle II's development of radio-guided artillery shells, and, when asked to cut through Army, Navy jurisdictional quarrels, told both services, "Gentlemen, the bomb doesn't care about your chain of command." He also sat on the top policy group that authorized the Manhattan Engineer District. Although General Leslie Groves ran the day-to-day, Bush's political capital cleared $2 billion in secret appropriations and persuaded skeptical congressmen that plutonium was more than professors talk. His wartime staff, never more than 60, operated from a townhouse on 1530 P Street in W, issuing 6,000 contracts to 200 universities and firms, a template for federal procurement regimes that endure today. On VJ Day, Bush faced a new task: preventing the scientific apparatus he'd built from collapsing back into peacetime penury. In July 1945, he delivered to Roosevelt's successor, Harry Truman, a report titled Science: The Endless Frontier. The document argued that federal investment in basic research would pay dividends in health, wealth, and security, provided it remained insulated from political meddling. Though Congress wrangled for 5 years over organizational details, Bush's blueprint yielded the National Science Foundation in 1950. His Atlantic monthly essay, As We May Think, published weeks after Hiroshima, sketched a hypothetical microfilm-based desk called the Memex, where associative links, he called them trails, would let researchers navigate oceans of data. The article seeded ideas later codified as hypertext, personal computing, and the World Wide Web. When graduate students at CERN met Tim Berners-Lee in 1990, many had already read Bush's prophetic prose in Xeroxed reprints. After resigning from the OSRD, Bush chaired the Joint Research and Development Board and served as scientific advisor to Presidents Truman and Eisenhower, though he gradually lost influence as thermonuclear strategy eclipsed radar and ballistics in Washington's imagination. He sat on the boards of Raytheon, whose microwave ovens traced lineage to Rad Lab magnetrons, Merck, and at /T, lobbying for policies that kept defense contracts flowing to private laboratories. Critics accused him of entrenching a military, industrial, academic complex, years before Eisenhower coined the phrase. But Bush insisted that only an open pipeline between government needs and university curiosity could prevent another Pearl Harbor. Bush's personal life rarely intruded on his professional persona. He married Phoebe Clara Davis in 1916. They raised two sons, Richard and John, in a colonial revival house overlooking Belmont Reservoir. He loved saltwater sailing and kept a wooden ketch named 10-Pound Note moored in Buzzards Bay. He wrote detective fiction under a pseudonym for Yankee magazine, enjoyed boiling live lobsters on the Harvard Bridge for freshman orientations, and despised handshakes without eye contact. His voluminous correspondence, 60,000 letters housed at the Library of Congress, ranges from tutorials on vacuum tube design to blunt critiques of McCarthyism. Science cannot thrive on loyalty oaths administered by men who could not pass a freshman chemistry lab. In 1965, MIT dedicated the Bush Building, E52, in his honor. He declined a televised ribbon cutting, saying the best monument to an engineer was a machine still whirring under its own momentum. His stature as elder statesman, however, surged after Sputnik. When President Eisenhower formed the President's Science Advisory Committee in 1957, he phoned Bush first, though the 70-year-old declined a formal chairmanship in favor of advising behind the scenes. He supported creation of NASA, but warned against profligate stunts that lacked scientific payoff. Integration into international science was more urgent, he said, than planting flags on barren moons. Bush retired from Raytheon's board in 1969, the year Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, and spent his final years writing a memoir, Pieces of the Action, published in 1970. The book reads like a field manual for scientific statesmanship, urging aspiring technocrats to master the two-handed slide rule of politics and measurement. He died on June 28, 1974 in Belmont, Massachusetts, of pneumonia following a stroke. At his funeral in Cambridge's First Parish Church, the eulogy was delivered by Jerome Wiesner, another MIT president and science advisor, who called Bush the engineer who built not merely devices, but the very system that makes American science an instrument of national purpose. Today, historians credit him with at least three enduring legacies: the mobilization blueprint that turned dispersed university labs into wartime powerhouses, the philosophical architecture of post-war federal science policy embodied in the NSF and NIH, and the Memex vision that presaged digital hypertext. If Claude Shannon fathered information theory and John von Neumann formalized computer architecture, Vannevar Bush provided the institutional scaffolding that let those ideas propagate. He proved that the boundary between wrench-turning practicality and conceptual audacity need not exist, provided one keeps asking, in his gravelly New England accent, which knob to turn to make the future manifest on an oscilloscope screen.